welcome Jamie Davis.
If you can give me one moment. In the world we live in today, we're faced with a lot of dismay, unanswered questions, just a lot of trauma and feelings of negative thoughts and expressions, and just on a day-to-day basis. However, in every experience in life, we can choose to learn from it or lose to it. A book I read a few years ago encouraged this train of thought. It was called The Shack. Has anyone here ever read the book The Shack? It's a really good book. However, it's very challenged by a lot of theologians. The writer of the book, William P. Young, introduces his friend, who is also the main character in the book. His friend name is Mackenzie Allen Phillips. Mackenzie, as a child, was very abused by his father. At a young age, he leaves home, travels the world, meets and marries the love of his life, who is opposite of him, Nanette. You see, William has been hardened over time. So as a response to the abuse, he's becoming really hardened man. However, this woman, Miss Nanette, comes along and she changes a lot of him, but not everything. They go on to have 5 beautiful children, but then tragedy hits. I'm going to read a little from the back for you. Mackenzie Allen Phillips, youngest daughter, Missy, has been abducted during a family vacation. And evidence that she may have been brutally murdered is found in an abandoned shack deep in the Oregon wilderness. 4 years later, in the midst of his great sadness, Matt receives a suspicious note, apparently from God, inviting him back to the shack for a weekend. Against his better judgment, he arrives at the shack on a wintry afternoon and walks back into his darkest nightmare. What he finds there will change his life forever. Can you imagine how he felt losing his baby girl? To think of an appropriate response to anything like that, any type of loss we could experience of that magnitude, we couldn't conceive that. However, Mac is challenged. His way of thinking, his way of life. In this book, he is introduced to different images or forms of God. In one scene in specific, he encounters a woman who appears to him in the form of a judge. She's calm, she's peaceful, yet she's relentless. Listen as I read a little bit from chapter 11. Here comes the judge. Judgment, I'm not even dead. A third time he stopped her, processing what he heard. Anger replacing his pain. This hardly seems fair. He knew his emotions were not helping. Does this happen to other people? Getting judged, before they're even dead? What if I change? What if I do better for the rest of my life? What if I repent? What then? Is there something you wish to repent of, Mackenzie? She adds sat back down. He looked at the smooth surface on the floor. Then he shook his head before answering. I wouldn't know where to begin, he mumbled. I'm quite a mess, aren't I? Yes, you are. Matt looked up and smiled. You're a glorious, destructive mess, Mackenzie. But you are not here to repent. At least not in the way that you understand. Mackenzie, you are not here to be judged. But, he interrupted, I thought you said that I was here for judgment. She remained cool and placid, as a summer breeze as she finished this question. I did, but you are not on trial here. Matt took a deep breath, relieved at her words. You will be the judge. The knot in his stomach returned as he realized what she had said. Finally, he dropped his eyes to the chair that stood waiting for him. What? Me? I'd rather not. He paused. I don't have the ability to judge. Oh, that's not true, returned her quick reply, which tingled with a hint of sarcasm. You have already proven yourself very capable in our short time together. And besides, you have judged many throughout your life. You have judged the actions and even the motivation of others, as if you somehow knew what those were in truth. You have judged the color of skin and body language and body odor. You have judged history and relationships. You have judged the value of a person's life by the quality of your concept of beauty. By all accounts, you are quite well practiced in this activity. Max felt ashamed, reddening his face. He had to admit he had done an awful lot of judging at this time, but he was no different from anyone else, was he? Who doesn't jump to conclusions about others from the way they impact us? There it was again, his self-centered view of the world around him. He looked up and saw her peering intently at him, quickly looking down again. Tell me, she inquired, if I may ask, by what criteria do you base your judgments? Matt looked up and tried to gaze at her, but he found that when he looked directly at her, his thinking was wavering. To peer into her eyes and to keep a train of coherent and logical thoughts seemed to be impossible. He had to look away into the darkness of the corner of the room, hoping to collect himself. Nothing that seems to make much sense at the moment, he finally admitted, his voice faltering. I confess that when I made those judgments, I felt quite justified. But now, of course you did, she said. Of course you did, she said, like a statement of fact, like something routine, not playing for any moment upon his evidence of shame and distress. Judging requires that you think yourself superior over the one you judge. Well, today, you'll be given the opportunity to put all of your ability to use. Come on, she said, patting the chair. I want you to sit here, now. Hesitantly, but obediently, he walked toward her and the waiting chair, which each step he seemed to grow smaller, or they both grew larger, he couldn't tell. He crawled up on the chair and felt childish with his massive desktop in front of him, and his feet barely touching the ground. And just what will I be judging? He asked, turning to look up at her. Not what? She paused and moved to the side of the desk. Who? His discomfort was growing in leaps and bounds, and sitting in an oversized regal chair didn't help. What right did he have to judge anyone? Sure, in some measure, he probably was guilty of judging almost everyone he had met, many that he had not. Matt knew that he was thoroughly guilty for his being self-centered. How dare he judge anyone? All of his judgment had been superficial, based on appearances and actions, things easily interpreted by whatever state of mind or prejudice that supported the need to exalt himself, or to feel safe, or to belong. He also knew that he was starting to panic. Your imagination, she interrupted his train of thought, is not serving you very well at this moment. No kidding, Sherlock, is what he thought. But all that came out of his mouth was a weak, I really can't do this. Whether you can or cannot is yet to be determined, she said with a smile, and my name is not Sherlock. Mac was grateful for the darkened room that hid his embarrassment. The silence that followed seemed to hold him captive for much longer than the few seconds it actually took to find his voice, and finally asked the question, so, who is it I'm supposed to judge? God, she paused, and the human race. She said it as if it was no particular consequence. It simply rolled off her tongue as if it were a daily occurrence. Mac was dumbfounded. You have got to be kidding, he exclaimed. Why not? Surely there are many people in your world you think deserve judgment. There must be at least a few who are to blame for so much of the pain and suffering. What about the greedy who feed off the poor of the world? What about the ones who sacrifice their young children to war? What about the men who beat their wives, Mackenzie? What about the fathers who beat their sons for no reason but to assuage their own suffering? Don't they deserve judgment, Mackenzie? Matt could sense the depth of his unresolved anger rising like a flood of fury. He sank back into the chair, trying to maintain his balance against an onslaught of images, but he could feel his control ebbing away. His stomach knotted as he clenched his fist, his breathing coming short and quick. And what about the man who preys on innocent little girls? What about him, Mackenzie? Is that man guilty? Should he be judged? Yes! Screamed Matt. Is he to blame for your loss? Yes! What about his father? The man who